So just to kind of, wrap up this little section, that's kind of the beginning of our conversation from my point of view about American democracy and religion, is that we have this basic constitutional assurance that the government's not going to start religions and it's not going to hinder your free exercise of your particular religion. And there are, of course, as we've talked about here, and you all have beautifully demonstrated, some very difficult issues around these questions. Now, I was very proud of the group that no one in here, when we talked about the First Amendment, said that it has the phrase in it, the separation of church and state. You all did very well. That is not actually a statement in the Constitution, of course, is it? It is really a statement that comes from a way distant time in American history, in the 1600s, from a man by the name of Roger Williams. Roger Williams came over in the second wave after the Plymouth Rock Pilgrims, and he came over in relation to the group that founded the Boston colony. And he came in relation to a man named John Winthrop, who was the first governor of the Boston colony, and who really was one of the founders. It was John Winthrop who, in one of his famous speeches as they were sailing across the Atlantic toward the New World, toward Boston, made the statement that America would be a city set on a hill. He was, of course, hearkening back to a statement that is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew on the lips of Jesus, in which Jesus says, a city set on a hill cannot be hid. It's in part of the Sermon on the Mount. And Winthrop was stating that there was this very, very high calling for America to be, among all the nations of the world, a unique nation. In fact, it was from John Winthrop that the idea known as American exceptionalism would give rise. The idea that America is an exceptional country. It is exceptional because God has made it so, according to Winthrop's thinking. God had called this new nation, this newly forming nation, which, by the way, Winthrop had to be very careful that he didn't call it a new nation, because he had England breathing over his neck and down his neck, making sure that he was not a separatist, that he wasn't trying to endorse separation from England. So Winthrop was always walking this very, very tightly strung tightrope between not looking too much like a separatist, but thinking like a separatist and creating structures whereby this group of people could eventually become their own nation. American exceptionalism, the idea of a city set on a hill, the notion was picked up, perhaps you remember from your more recent history, by Ronald Reagan, who quoted that, and who quoted it probably not completely in context, actually. And then Sarah Palin also quoted it again in her speech. Actually, it was in the debate with Joe Biden. She quoted and quoted it as being a Reagan quote, interestingly enough. Actually, it's from Jesus originally, through John Winthrop, to Reagan, to Sarah. But anyway, but this idea of American exceptionalism was given root, and a fellow by the name of Roger Williams, who got himself in trouble everywhere he served as a minister. He was kicked out of Boston. He went to Plymouth. The Plymouth Rock Pilgrim folks kicked him out because he was even too difficult for them to deal with. He went to Connecticut. The Connecticut people couldn't stand him, and they were about to send him to jail for some sort of trumped-up charge. And his friend John Winthrop actually got wind of it, and he sent word to him to get out under cover of darkness and to leave. And Roger Williams ended up going to what is now Rhode Island, founding Rhode Island, and actually founding the city of Providence, Rhode Island. And that was where he spent the rest of his time. It is Roger Williams who said, among his writings, I want there to be a wall of separation. No, yea, not just a wall, but a hedge and a wall of separation between the church and the state. And his issue was that the state should never, under any circumstance, encroach itself into the religious life of free people. That was the job of free people to decide their religion. He also said that religious people should be very careful about intending to make the government a religious institution. They were welcome to give their opinions about moral values and issues that they thought were important for governmental consideration. They were free to rabble-rouse and create all kinds of stir and trouble for things they thought were unjust in the government or wrong, but they should not attempt to make the government a religious institution. That was as dangerous as the government instituting religion. You see his point? That there is an important separation, and so it was Williams who had this idea. There must be a separation of church and state, and he wanted a wall, and he wanted a hedge. He wanted a big, heavy, nicely trimmed hedgerow along with a wall to keep it clear that these two should not be functioning in each other's space in any significant way. Certainly impinging on each other for the purpose of rights and freedom. Roger Williams was a fascinating guy. I would not have wanted to be in his church. He was tough. He was one of those fire and brimstone, hardline preachers. And he believed that if you did not believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, whatever that might have meant for Roger Williams, you were going to go to hell. And yet, he became one of the most beloved figures among the Native American Indian people in the regions around Rhode Island of any other person. And even to this day, they celebrate Roger Williams as a man of integrity because while he believed that if they did not come to a personal relationship with Jesus, they would go to hell, he believed they had every right in the world to make that decision not to and to go to hell if they so chose. And they should be protected under the law to be able to make that decision not to. That was this interesting character. It was Thomas Jefferson who in the 1700s, when he was approached by a group of Baptists who were afraid that the Congregationalists were going to take over the government, picked up the term from Roger Williams and said, "There shall remain a separation, a wall of separation of church and state." And so these two characters really understood this idea of the separation of church and state. Okay, that's a bit of our history. I actually, did a Constitution first, which is later, and the Roger Williams thing second, which is earlier, but you get the idea. This has been in our national conversation and national psyche since the 1600s, since the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, and we started this whole adventure called democracy in America. And it has been a part of our national conversation of what do you do with religion in democracy? What do you do with democracy in relation to religion? And how do you make it all work? And we have not done it terribly well, despite John Winthrop's idea that we're a city set on a hill. We've had our shining moments, and we've had some pretty abysmal moments in terms of this. The way that, for instance, the way that some groups were treated by other groups in early America were absolutely reprehensible. The way that Native peoples were treated by many of the Christians, my own denomination, the Congregationalists, are absolutely horrendous on their record in terms of Native Americans in Connecticut, for instance. It's a shameful account of their destruction of Native peoples. So this, and one would say, Native American spirituality is another form, a valid form of spiritual understanding in life, another form of religion that ought to be respected and valued and treasured and protected under the law. But we have had our pretty horrendous moments in America and in American history and in many of our denominations in regard to religious freedom.